It is not that Trump and his family will use the influence of government to increase their wealth, although this will certainly take place on a massive scale. It is that hundreds of billions of federal dollars will be diverted into the hands of cronies, sleazy bankers, unethical financial firms, and scabrous hedge fund managers. Everything will, to use a business term, be harvested. The decaying pillars of the liberal state in America will be obliterated. At the same time, the militarization of America is being accelerated. The defense budget will be increased by 10%, or $54 billion, although the United States already spends more than the defense budgets of the next 7 countries combined. The paramilitary forces of immigration and customs enforcement, which will soon hire 10,000 more agents, and the Border Patrol, which will hire 5,000 more agents, along with Homeland Security, have all deputized local and state police to function as their auxiliaries. They will be flooded with cast-off military-issue equipment. These paramilitary forces will not disband once they have finished terrorizing and deporting some of the 11 million undocumented workers in the United States. They will turn on their next victims, Muslims, African Americans, Asians, dissidents. This militarization of society is designed to carry out the race war that Trump and those around him see as inevitable at home and abroad. In poor communities of color, this race war has already begun. Racial profiling, random police stops, raids at homes and businesses, people of color pulled from vehicles at checkpoints, seizures of individuals with no criminal records or who never committed a serious crime, imprisonment without trial, expedited deportation hearings and removal proceedings that violate the most basic human rights. The arrest of a beneficiary of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA program, Daniel Ramirez Medina, 23, who, along with the program's other 750,000 successful applicants, had revealed all personal history to the government in applying for DACA status. Parents separated, perhaps forever, from their children. The hunted going underground, the end of the rule of law, the abandonment of the common good, the obliteration of a social state in which institutions and assistance programs, from public education to Social Security and welfare, make justice, equality, and dignity possible. White Europeans who are undocumented are not being targeted. The executive orders of Trump are directed against people of color. They begin from the premise that white Americans are the true victims of neoliberalism, deindustrialization, and falling living standards. The Trump orders are written not to make America great again, but to make America white.
Hello, Symptom. How you doing? How are you doing? It's great from wherever you're watching us from. As you know, I'm a presenter of Unique Stories, and I'm hoping that you're doing great from wherever you're watching us from. Now, I want to talk about something really, really important. And this is a speech that was given like 8 years ago when Chris Hedges was more of seeing what was happening. I mean, it was ahead of his time trying to describe all the things that are happening right now, beginning from mass deportation, high taxes, arrest wars that are happening today in the United States, and other crazy things that are happening. Now, for some of you who don't know Chris Hedges is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and fierce critic of American imperialism and a corporate power. He delivered a scathing critique of Donald Trump nearly 8 years ago. In his address, Edges warned that Trump was not an anomaly but a symptom of decaying empire, an inevitable product of neoliberalism, systemic corruption, and disillusioned populace. At the heart of Edge's warning was the idea that American democracy had directly been hollowed out, and Trump merely exposed the rot. Fast forward to today, and many of his predictions, race wars, mass deportation, economic instability, suppression of free speech, have either materialized or intensified, suggesting his foresight was not an alarmist, but deeply rooted historical and social political analysis. And that's how the oligarchs work. What Chris Edges was trying to describe 8 years ago is the same damn thing that is happening today. Very accurate, with no addition or subtraction. Everything that he tries to say right now, he was so accurate, and it seemed like he saw things ahead of his time. And when we get to understand and look of what Dr. Chris Edges was trying to talk about, is one of the central themes in Edges' speech was the exploitation of racial and cultural divisions as a political tool. He described how Trump tapped into the fears and grievances of economically disfranchised, Black Americans, directing their anger away from elites and towards vulnerable minority. This strategy has exacerbated race relations in the U.S., leading to what some describe as modern race war, heightened tension, hate crimes, and even confrontation rooted in historical animosity. Right? It just emphasizes that this is a classical technique of authoritarian demagogues: distract the masses with scapegoats while dismantling democratic structures behind the scenes. Now, I want us to watch this video. I'm your host and presenter, Duke Stories, and I'm hoping that you're going to be finding value in the speech that Chris Edges is going to share with you. But until then, for those who are watching us for the first time, I'll ask you to subscribe to the channel, join our membership, and really get to see what we can offer you. For those who are always coming back and watching our videos, I'm really grateful for the support that you're giving me. For those who are watching for the first time, consider subscribing, sharing, so that you can all see all these things that are really important, and they form the fabrics of the United States. So if you think that this page is helpful, give it a thumbs up and let me know what you think in the comment section. But until then, let's watch the video. I'll be back with my commentary as usual. As you know, I'm your presenter, Duke Stories, and I'm hoping to see you.
They are an updated version of the Nazis' Nuremberg laws, the Jim Crow laws, the Chinese Exclusion Act, and the Naturalization Act of 1870. They are intended to institutionalize an overt racial hierarchy in the United States, one already far advanced in the miniature police states where people of color live in marginal communities. In these impoverished enclaves, there is no right to trial or due process. Militarized police kill with impunity, and the courts lock people away, often for life. Rights are treated as privileges that can instantly be revoked. The poor, especially poor people of color, are exempted from moral consideration. They are attacked as impediments to social cohesion, and these impediments must be eliminated. Jews, their community centers enduring threats of violence, and their graveyards desecrated, will also be persecuted. American fascism is rapidly being cemented into place by uniformed and heavily armed paramilitary goons, clutching the flag and the cross and reciting the Pledge of Allegiance and the Lord's Prayer. Little or no prospect of rescue from individual indolence or impotence can be expected to arrive from a political state that is not and refuses to be a social state. The sociologist Zygmunt Bauman wrote, "Without social rights for all, a large and all probability growing number of people will find their political rights of little use and unworthy of their attention. If political rights are necessary to set social rights in place, social rights are indispensable to make political rights real and keep them in operation. The two rights need each other for their survival. That survival can only be their joint achievement. Presidential Chief Strategist Stephen Bannon, in his public comments and his films, such as Generation Zero, has embraced a historical determinism worthy of Karl Marx. He posits that Western culture has been contaminated and is being destroyed by darker races and barbaric religions and belief systems. His conspiratorial view of history and society sees a global war between the white race and the lesser breeds of the earth as not only inevitable, but one that will reinvigorate and purify America. This idea of regeneration through violence, which has always been part of the American myth, is also a central tenet of fascism. Racists and conspiracy theorists such as Bannon, Michael Anton, Stephen Miller, Sebastian Gorka constitute Trump's ideological brain trust. Gorka goes so far as to argue that the failure to understand the evil of radical Islam stems from a systematic subversion of the national security establishment under the banner of inclusivity, cultural awareness, and political correctness. In a 2014 speech, Bannon said, "I believe we've come partly off track in the years since the fall of the Soviet Union, and we're starting now in the 21st century, which I believe strongly is a crisis both of our church, a crisis of our faith, a crisis of the West, a crisis of capitalism. There is a major war brewing that's already global," Bannon said. "It's going global in scale. And today's technology, today's media, today's access to weapons of mass destruction, it's going to lead to a global conflict, and I believe has to be confronted today. Every day that we refuse to look at this as what it is and the scale of it, and really the viciousness of it, will be a day where you will rue that we didn't act." Bannon is a proponent of the theory popularized by authors William Strauss and Neil Howe in their books Generations, The History of America's Future, 1584 to 2069, and The Fourth Turning, an American prophecy, what the psychos of history tell us about America's next rendezvous with destiny. These authors argue that roughly every 80 years, or an average human lifespan, the country goes through a cataclysmic crisis. This crisis triggers war, industrial slaughter, and genocide, and lasts for a decade or more. In its aftermath, they argue the social order is rejuvenated. Strauss and Howe highlight the American Revolution of 1775 to 1783, the Civil War, the Great Depression, and World War II as examples of how the cycle works. Pseudo-intellectuals such as Strauss and Howe play the role that Paul de Lagarde, Julius Langbaum, Arthur Moeller, von den Broek, and Alfred Rosenberg played for the Nazi Party. They give an intellectual veneer to racist conspiracy theories, a perverted nationalism, a hatred for culture, and the lust for domination through violence. I share Bannon's distaste for corporate globalization, free trade agreements, the failure to put Wall Street bankers in jail, the bank bailouts and crony capitalism, and would even concede that Americans wallow in the moral swamp of a culture of narcissism. He is right when he attacks the two major political parties as the one party of Davos. But his solution to the purported crisis, total war by the white race to regain its ascendancy, is insane, as are the causes he cites. A New Deal that turned citizens into whining dependents, the permissiveness of the 1960s, the white guilt that made the country cater, in his words, irresponsibly to African Americans by giving them social service programs and undeserved mortgages that led to the 2008 financial meltdown. An intellectual and liberal class composed essentially of traitors who hate America, and, quote unquote, the new barbarity of jihadist Islamic fascism. Racism, misogyny, the inherent cruelty of capitalism and the crimes of empire, from Wounded Knee to Vietnam and Iraq, simply do not exist in Bannon's mystical nationalist worldview. He insists that the white, male, aristocratic elites who formed a republic that enslaved African Americans, exterminated Native Americans, denied the vote to women and white men without property, created, quote, a church and a civilization that really is the flower of mankind. And this is the myth he wants to recover. Now, it may be that the deep state, the shadowy world of the security and surveillance bureaucracy, the arms industry, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and corporations that actually rule the country, disturbed by Trump's impulsivity, irrationality, and incompetence, will move to replace him. This was certainly the idea when the organs of internal security used a wiretap to discredit and remove Michael Flynn, and it is what is happening now with the leaks about the Attorney General's two meetings with the Russian ambassador. But the ascendancy to the White House of Michael Pence, a more polished and disciplined politician who will advance the agenda of the Christian right, will not make things better, and indeed, they may make things worse. Those being placed now into power are agents of destruction. Betsy DeVos is moving to defund our system of public education and use government vouchers to expand corporate charter school chains and those run by the Christian right. Scott Pruitt is dismantling the Environmental Protection Agency. He has already called for a 25% reduction in the EPA's budget, the elimination of 3,000 jobs, and the slashing of numerous programs, including a 70% cut to its climate protection program that oversees cutting emissions of greenhouse gases. Bannon was the dark hand behind the ban on Muslims entering the United States from 7 Muslim-majority countries, a ban you can expect to see extended if the Trump administration is successful in removing a stay issued by a district court or issuing a new executive order. Bannon was behind the order to the Department of Homeland Security to draw up lists of Muslim organizations and individuals in the United States that, in the language of that executive order, have, quote-unquote, been radicalized and provided material support to terrorism-related organizations in countries that pose a threat to the United States. Such lists will be used to criminalize Muslim leaders and the institutions and organizations they built. Then, once Muslims are dealt with, there will be new Homeland Security lists that will allow the government to target the press, activists, labor leaders, dissident intellectuals, and the left. Lenin wanted to destroy the state, and that's my goal too, Bannon told the writer Ronald Radosh in 2013. I want to bring everything crashing down and destroy all of today's establishment. This culture of destruction was launched 4 decades ago by corporate forces. The corporate elites, terrified by the mobilization of the left in the 1960s, by what the political scientist Samuel Huntington called America's excess of democracy, built and funded counter-institutions to delegitimize and marginalize critics of corporate capitalism and imperialism. They bought the allegiances of the two main political parties. They imposed obedience to the neoliberal ideology within academia and the press. This campaign, laid out by Lewis Powell in his 1971 memorandum titled Attack on American Free Enterprise System, was the blueprint for the creeping corporate coup d'etat that 45 years later is largely complete. The dismantling of democratic institutions, places where the citizen has agency and a voice, is far graver than the ascendancy to the White House of the demagogue Trump. The coup destroyed our two-party system. Labor unions are a spent force. The press is corporatized. Universities have been purged of dissidents and independent scholars who criticize neoliberalism and decry the decay of democratic institutions. Public broadcasting and the arts, places where voices not beholden to corporate power should find a sanctuary, have been defunded and forced to beg for corporate money, which of course comes with corporate censorship. And it is expected that what little money the government gives to public broadcasting and organizations such as the National Endowment for the Arts will soon be eliminated under Trump. The courts have been stacked with judges whose legal careers were spent serving corporate power, a trend in appointments that continued under Barack Obama. Money has replaced the vote, which is how someone as unqualified as DeVos can buy herself a cabinet seat. And the Democratic Party, rather than sever its ties to Wall Street and corporations, is naively waiting in the wings to profit from a Trump debacle. This coup destroyed more than our democratic institutions. It destroyed the very credibility of liberal democracy. Self-identified liberals such as the Clintons and Obama mouthed the words of liberal democratic values while making war on those values in the service of corporate power. And the revolt we see rippling across the United States and much of the globe is a revolt not only against a corporate system that has betrayed workers, but also, for many, the ideas and values espoused by a bankrupt liberal class. This is very dangerous. The discrediting of liberal democracy will allow the radical right to cement into place in America and much of Europe and other parts of the globe a form of fascism. Presidential advisor Stephen Miller, an ardent white supremacist, in an interview on Face the Nation on CBS, was quite blunt about what to expect. We have a judiciary that has taken far too much power and become in many cases a supreme branch of government, he said. Our opponents, the media, and the whole world will soon see, as we begin to take further actions, that the powers of the president to protect our country are very substantial and will not be questioned. History may not repeat itself, but it echoes. The framers of the Constitution, steeped in the rise of empire and death of democracy in ancient Greece and Rome, attempted to provide checks and balances to keep the American republic from falling like their ancient counterparts into oligarchy and tyranny. This knowledge of the past, dismissed as frivolous by our consumer culture and business elites, allows us to recognize the familiar warning signs signs on the road to tyranny. If we studied the collapse of ancient Greece, Rome, the Weimar Republic, or even the former Yugoslavia, we would be far more alert to the current march towards despotism. Thucydides, who wrote that the tyranny Athens imposed on others, it finally imposed on itself, is a far better guide to our future than Milton Friedman or Ayn Rand. The historian Fritz Stern, in The Politics of Cultural Despair, his book on the rise of fascism in Germany, warned repeatedly of the danger of a bankrupt liberalism. Stern, who saw the same dark, irrational forces at work today that he watched as a boy in Nazi Germany, argued that the spiritually and politically alienated are the prime recruits for a politics centered around cultural hatreds and personal resentments. And Stern told me that in Germany, there was a yearning for fascism before the word fascism was invented. They attacked liberalism, Stern wrote of the fascists emerging at that time in Germany, because it seemed to them the principal premise of modern society. Everything they dreaded seemed to spring from it. The bourgeois life, Manchesterism, which is laissez-faire capitalism, materialism, Parliament and the parties, the lack of political leadership, even more, they sense in liberalism the source of all their inner sufferings. Theirs was a resentment of loneliness. Their one desire was for a new faith, a new community of believers, a world with fixed standards and no doubts, a new national religion that would bind all Germans together. All this liberalism denied, hence they hated liberalism, blamed it for making outcasts of them, for uprooting them from their imaginary past and from their faith. It turns out 45 years later that those who truly hate us for our freedoms are not the array of dehumanized enemies cooked up by the war machine, the Vietnamese, the Cambodians, Afghanis, Iraqis, Iranians, or even the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, or ISIS. They are the financiers, bankers, politicians, public intellectuals and pundits, lawyers, journalists and business people, many cultivated in elite universities and business schools, who served, as Matt Taibbi says, as the guardians of the orthodoxy of neoliberalism and empire. In the twilight phase of capitalism, wealth is no longer created by producing or manufacturing. It is created by manipulating the prices of stocks and commodities and imposing a crippling debt peonage on the public. Our casino capitalism has merged with the actual gambling industry. This is an economic model designed to prey on the desperate. Young men and women burdened by student loans, underpaid workers crushed by credit card debt and mortgages, bankrupt towns and cities forced to borrow to maintain municipal services and sell off municipal assets, from sewers and water treatment plants to their parking authority to corporations. Casino magnates such as Sheldon Adelson, who has advocated attacking Iran with nuclear weapons, and hedge fund managers such as Paul Singer, who buys distressed or defaulted bonds at pennies on the dollar and then sues for full repayment, which is how he trashed the Argentine economy, and Robert Mercer add nothing of value to society. They do not generate money, but instead redistribute it upwards to the 1%. They use lobbyists and campaign contributions to rewrite laws and regulations and build monopolies. And this is how the drug company Mylan in the United States raised the price of an EpiPen used to treat allergy reactions from $57 in 2007 to $500. They have given themselves the legal power to carry out a tax boycott, loot the treasury, close factories, send jobs overseas, and gut social service programs. These corporate mandarins are, if we speak in the language of God and country, traitors. They are parasites. Financial speculation in 17th century England was a crime. Speculators were hanged. The heads of most of today's banks and hedge fund managers and the executives of large corporations such as Walmart and Gap that run sweatshop death traps for impoverished workers overseas deserve prison far more than most of the poor students of color I teach within the prison system, people who never had a fair trial or a fair chance in life. When a tiny cabal seizes power, monarchist, communist, fascist, or corporate, it creates a mafia economy and a mafia state. Trump is not an anomaly. He is the grotesque visage of our collapsed democracy. Trump and his coterie of billionaires, generals, half-wits, Christian fascists, criminals, racists, and deviants play the role of the Snopes clan in some of William Faulkner's novels. The Snopes filled the power vacuum of the decayed South and ruthlessly seized control from the degenerated former slaveholding aristocratic elites. Flem Snopes and his extended family, which includes a killer, a pedophile, a bigamist, an arsonist, a mentally disabled man who copulates with a cow, and a relative who sells tickets to witness the bestiality, are fictional representations of the scum now elevated to the highest level of the federal government. The usual reference to amorality, while accurate, is not sufficiently distinctive and by itself does not allow us to place them as they should be placed in a historical moment. The critic Irving Howe wrote of the Snopeses. Perhaps the most important thing to be said is that they are what comes afterwards, the creatures that emerge from the devastation with the slime still upon their lips. Let a world collapse in the South or Russia, and there appear figures of coarse ambition, driving their way up from beneath the social bottom, men to whom moral claims are not so much absurd as incomprehensible, sons of bushwhackers and musics drifting in from nowhere and taking over through the sheer outrageousness of their monolithic force, Howe wrote. They become presidents of local banks and chairmen of party regional committees, and later, a trifle slicked up, they muscle their way into Congress or the Politburo. Scavengers without inhibition. They need not believe in the crumbling official code of their society. They need only learn to mimic its sounds. Trump and those around him believe in one truth, which is whatever they proclaim at the moment, although any such declaration may contradict what they said a few hours before. They are possessed by one idea: conflict. They sanctify violence, misogyny, a disdain for empathy, and the self-appointed right to engage in bouts of frenzied rage. These characteristics, they insist, are a sign of strength and virility. Their highest aesthetic is militarism, violence, and war. Without conflict, without enemies real or imagined, their ideological structures and their racism collapse into a heap of contradictions and absurdities. Christian fascists are now the vanguard of this emerging American fascism. They ferret out facts and formulas that buttress their peculiar worldview and discard truths that contradict their messianic delusions. They mouth a few biblical cliches to justify bigotry, misogyny, homophobia, chauvinism, and repression. It is propaganda masquerading as ideology. These Christian fascists are singularly incurious. They are linguistically, culturally, and historically illiterate about the Muslim world and about most other foreign cultures, science, and intellectual pursuits. Yet they blindly write off 1/5 of the world's population, Muslims, as irredeemable, while they dismiss climate change as a hoax. The inability of white supremacists and Christian fascists to recognize the humanity of others springs from their spiritual and intellectual impoverishment. They mistake their bigotry for honesty. They mistake their ignorance for innocence. They cannot separate fantasy from reality. And such people are, as James Baldwin said, moral monsters. Evil for them is embodied in the dehumanized other. And once the human personification of evil is eradicated, evil itself is supposed to disappear. Except, of course, that as soon as one group of human beings is annihilated, another human embodiment of evil rises to take its place. The Nazis began with the Jews. Our fanatics are beginning with the undocumented and Muslims, and history has shown where they will go from here. The nationalist is by definition an ignoramus, the Yugoslav writer Danilo Kish wrote. Nationalism is the line of least resistance, the easy way. The nationalist is untroubled. He knows or thinks he knows what his values are. That's to say, national. That's to say, the values of the nation he belongs to, ethical and political. He is not interested in others. They are no concern of his. Hell, it's other people, other nations, another tribe. They don't even need investigating. The nationalist sees other people in his own image as nationalists. Like all utopians, these people believe that their agenda is being implemented for our benefit. They are like Cardinal Robert Bellarmine, who oversaw the burning of Giordano Bruni at the stake and who argued that eradicating heretics does them a favor because it saves them from their own damnation. It is impossible to have a rational dialogue with people who view reality through the binary lens of black and white, us and them. They do not recognize the right of dissent. Dissent is at best obstruction and probably treason. Fanatics in power always become inquisitors. Trump has no coherent belief system or coherent ideology, but his ideological vacuum is being filled by the Christian right. What comes next, history has shown, will not be pleasant. A corrupt and inept ruling elite, backed by the organs of state security and law enforcement, will transform workers into serfs. The most benign dissent will be criminalized. The ravaging of the ecosystem will propel us ever closer towards extinction. Hate talk will, as stagnation and decay continue, call for attacks against Muslims, undocumented workers, African Americans, feminists, intellectuals, artists, dissidents, all of whom will be scapegoated for the country's decline. Magical thinking will dominate our airwaves and be taught in our public schools. Art and culture will be degraded to nationalist kitsch. All the cultural and intellectual disciplines that allow us to view the world from the perspective of the other, that foster empathy, understanding, and compassion, will be replaced by a grotesque and cruel hypermasculinity and hypermilitarism. Reality, any discourse based on verifiable fact and truth, are under assault. Verbal confusion reigns, truth and illusion have merged. Mental chaos makes it hard to fathom what is happening. We feel trapped in a hall of mirrors. Revealed lies are answered with new lies. The rational is countered with the irrational. Cognitive dissonance prevails. We endure a disquieting shame, even guilt. Tens of millions of Americans, especially women, undocumented workers, Muslims, and African Americans, suffer the acute anxiety of being pursued by a predator. All this is by design. Demagogues always infect the governed with their own psychosis. The lies pour out of the White House like flocks of pigeons. Donald Trump's election victory was a landslide. He had the largest inauguration crowds in American history. 3 million to 5 million undocumented immigrants voted illegally. Climate change is a hoax. Vaccines cause autism. Immigrants are carriers of, quote, tremendous infectious disease. The election was rigged until it wasn't. We don't know who really knocked down the World Trade Center. Torture works. Mexico will pay for the wall, and America will be great again. Trump, a 70-year-old man with orange-tinted skin and hair that Penn Jillette has likened to cotton candy made of piss, is, as Trump often reminds us, quote, very good looking. He does not read. He knows little of history, politics, law, philosophy, art, or governance, but insists, quote, my IQ is one of the highest, and you all know it. Please don't feel so stupid or insecure. It's not your fault. He goes on to say of the mediocrities he has installed in his cabinet that, quote, they have by far the highest IQ of any cabinet ever assembled. It is an avalanche of absurdities. And this mendacity would be easier to repulse if the problem was solely embodied in Trump. But even in the face of a rising despotism, the Democratic Party and the liberal class refuses to denounce the corporate forces that eviscerated our democracy, impoverished the country, and created Trump. The neoliberal Trump demonizes Muslims, undocumented workers, and the media. The neoliberal Democratic Party demonized Vladimir Putin and FBI Director James Comey. No one challenges corporate power. The warring elites pit alternative facts against alternative facts. All engage in demagoguery. And we will, I fear, be condemned to despotism by Trump and by the cowardice and dishonesty of the liberal class. The order for some employees of several federal agencies, including the Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Research Service, the National Park Service, and the Department of Health and Human Services to restrict or cease communication with the press or members of Congress, along with the attempt to impose 10-year felony convictions on 6 reporters who covered the inauguration protests, is part of this campaign to marginalize reality itself and replace it with fantasy. Facts for demagogues depend solely on those who have the power to create them. And the goal of the Trump administration is to create an artificial consistency, an absorbing and endless spectacle that advances its warped perception of the world. It must, as it has day after day, dominate our lives as it reconfigures reality. Fantastic and absurd assertions are treated seriously, a process that over time erodes the power of the rational. Before they seize power and establish a world according to their doctrines, totalitarian movements conjure up a lying world of consistency which is more adequate to the needs of the human mind than reality itself, in which through sheer imagination, uprooted masses can feel at home and are spared the never-ending shocks which real life and real experiences deal to human beings and their expectations, Hannah Arendt wrote. The force possessed by totalitarian propaganda, before the movements have the power to drop iron curtains to prevent anyone's disturbing by the slightest reality the gruesome quiet of an entirely imaginary world, lies in its ability to shut the masses off from the real world. This assault on fact, on truth, on reality, is empowered by the loss of credibility of our democratic institutions. And it has thrown the country into an existential as well as an economic crisis. The courts, university, and press are no longer trusted by tens of millions of Americans who correctly see them as organs of the corporate elites. These institutions are traditionally the mechanism by which a society is unable to unmask the lies of the powerful, critique ruling ideologies, and promote justice. Because Americans have been bitterly betrayed by their institutions, the Trump regime can attack the press as the opposition party, threaten to cut off university funding, taunt a federal jurist as a so-called judge, and denounce a court order as outrageous. The decay of democratic institutions is the prerequisite for the rise of authoritarian or fascist regimes. And this decay has given credibility to a pathological liar. The Trump administration, according to an Emerson College poll, is considered by 49% of registered voters to be truthful, while the media are considered truthful by only 39% of registered voters. Once American democratic institutions no longer function, once large sectors of the public believe, as Trump says, that the press is the enemy of the American people, reality becomes whatever absurdity the White House issues. Most of the rules of democracy are unwritten. These rules determine public comportment and ensure respect for democratic norms, procedures, and institutions. Trump has, to the delight of his supporters, rejected this political and cultural etiquette. And Arendt noted that when democratic institutions collapse, it is, quote, easier to accept patently absurd propositions than the old truths which have become pious banalities. The chatter of the liberal ruling elites about our democracy is itself an absurdity. Vulgarity, with its cynical dismissal of respected standards and accepted theories, she wrote, infects political discourse, and this vulgarity is mistaken for courage and a new style of life. Trump's theatricality works. He forces the press and the public to repeat his lies, inadvertently giving them credibility. He is always moving. He is always on display. He has no fixed belief system. Trump, as he consolidates power and adopts the ideology of the Christian right, seamlessly forges the magical thinking of the Christian right with his own magical thinking. Idiocy, self-delusion, megalomania, fantasy, and government repression will come wrapped in images of the Christian cross and the American flag. The corporate state, hostile or indifferent to the plight of the citizens, has no emotional pull among the public. It has long presented political candidates as celebrities. Campaigns eschew issues to make people feel good about candidates and themselves. Ideas are irrelevant. Emotional euphoria is paramount. The voter is only a prop in this political theater. Politics is anti-politics. It is reality television, and Trump proved better at this game than his opponents. It is a game in which fact and knowledge do not matter. Politicians, like celebrities, are manufactured personalities. Reality is what you create. Entertainment is paramount. The skillful manipulation of emotion is confused with knowledge. We were conditioned for a Trump. These lies create a climate in which everyone is assumed to be lying. The truth becomes suspect and obscured. Narratives begin to believe not because they are true or even sound true, but because they are emotionally appealing. The aim of systematic lying, as Arendt wrote, is the transformation of human nature itself. The lies eventually foster somnambulism among a population that surrenders to the magical thinking and ceases to care. It checks out. It becomes cynical. It only asks to be entertained and given a vent for its frustration and rage. And demagogues produce enemies the way a magician pulls rabbits out of a hat. They wage constant battles against non-existent dangers, rapidly replacing one after the other to keep the rhetoric at a fever pitch. Practically speaking, the totalitarian ruler proceeds like a man who persistently insults another man until everybody knows that the latter is his enemy, so that he can, with some plausibility, go out and kill him in self-defense, Arendt wrote. This certainly is a little crude, but it works, as everybody will know who has watched how certain successful careerists eliminate competitors. To recover our mental balance, we must respond to Trump the way victims of trauma respond to abuse. We must build communities where we can find understanding and solidarity. And we must allow ourselves to mourn. We must name the psychosis that afflicts us. We must carry out acts of civil disobedience and steadfast defiance to re-empower others and ourselves. We must fend off the madness and engage in dialogues based on truth, literacy, empathy, and reality. We must invest more time in activities such as finding solace in nature or focusing on music, theater, literature, art, even worship. Activities that hold the capacity for renewal and transcendence. This is the only way we will remain psychologically whole. Building an outer shell or attempting to hide will exacerbate our psychological distress and oppression. We cannot, as the Democratic Party appears to be doing, hope that the 2018 or 2020 elections will solve our dilemma. These reactionary forces, which have been plotting for 4 decades for this moment, extend far beyond the Trump White House. Their tentacles reach across national borders, meaning no country, including Canada, is immune. As the state increases the levels of violence against nonviolent dissent, we must never respond with violence. The use of violence, including property destruction, the taunting of police, is a gift to the security and surveillance state. It allows the state to demonize and isolate a mass movement. It drives away the bulk of the population. Violence against the state is used by the authorities to justify greater forms of control and repression. The corporate state understands and welcomes the language of force. This is a game the government will always win and we will always lose. If we are perceived as a flag-burning, rock-throwing, angry mob that embraces violence, we will be easily crushed. We can succeed only if we win the hearts and minds of the wider public, and ultimately many of those within the structures of power, including the police. When violence is used against non-violent protesters demanding basic forms of justice, it exposes the weakness of the state. It delegitimizes those in power. It prompts a passive population to respond with active support for the protesters. It creates internal divisions within the structures of power that, as I witnessed in the revolutions in Eastern Europe, paralyze and defeat those in authority. Martin Luther King Jr. held marches in Birmingham, Alabama, rather than Albany, Georgia, because he knew Birmingham Public Safety Commissioner Bull Connor would overreact and expose the city's racist structures. The acts of resistance, including the massive street protests the day after the inauguration, and later the demonstrations that grew out of the ban on Muslims, the Department of Energy's refusal to give the Trump administration a list of employees that worked on climate change, Acting Attorney General Sally Yates' refusal to enforce the travel ban, and hundreds of State Department staff members signing a memo opposing the immigration restrictions terrify those around Trump. We have the power to make any country ungovernable, but we do not have much time. Corporate power is global. It will make it harder and harder to organize, to get into the streets, to carry out nationwide strikes, including within the federal bureaucracy. And this resistance must also be accompanied by an alternative vision of a socialist, anti-capitalist society, because the enemy in the end is not Trump or Bannon. It is corporate power, and if we do not dismantle corporate power, we will never stop fascism's seduction of the white working class and unemployed. Now is the time not to cooperate. Now is the time to shut down the systems of power. Now is the time to resist. It is our last chance. The fanatics are moving with lightning speed. So should we. Hope comes from the numerous protests that have been mounted in the streets, at town halls, led by First Nations people, held by members of Congress.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm hoping that you are doing super great. Really, come think about it. Everything that Professor Chris Edges have talked about are exactly the things that are happening today in the United States, right? There is suppression of freedom of speech, mass deportation, high taxation, and the tariff wars that are happening today, everything that we are seeing, and every nation is coming out calling out the United States. And all this was predicted that's going to happen. Now, let's talk about the issue of mass deportation, as Chris Edges talked about. Mass deportation, another issue Chris Edges foresaw. I've been accustomed of Trump era immigration policies. While the Obama administration was also criticized for high deportation numbers, Trump's rhetoric and policies institutionalized cruelty, family separation, children in cages, and ICE raids in communities and workplaces. I just linked these to a broader trend of dehumanization and the normalization of state violence. In his view, targeting immigrants is not just about border control, it is performance of power that conditions the public to accept authoritarianism as a solution to a complex social issue. Remember, we have a lot of white undocumented immigrants, but now they're not being taken away. We have black people who belongs to the United States, black people who are true citizens of the United States, but still they are being deported. What does this tell you? There is so much crazy things going on. Talking about ICE raids, how the Latinos are being deported right now, or if not right now, this is something that happened some times ago. So talking about these mass deportations and every crazy thing that is happening, I believe that majority of people that voted for Donald Trump are right now kind of regretting the decisions that they made, only if they know that this guy will turn against them. What you need to know is that American presidents, almost all of them, they do not serve the citizens. They usually serve the elites. So they will lie to you that they'll do A, B, and C, and D. But when they get up there, if it doesn't benefit them, trust me, they're going to be deporting you. I'm also going to be talking about massive economic dislocation under Trump, according to Chris Edges' prediction and how he said this. Now, Edges also warned of massive economic dislocation under Trump, predicting mass layoffs and the decimation of working class security. Today, we see the manifestation of these in the form of gigification of labor, widespread job insecurity, and economic system that rewards the ultra wealthy while eroding protections for worker. The COVID-19 pandemic further exacerbates the conditions, revealing a government more invested in corporate bailouts than in supporting average citizens. Right. The mass layoffs across tech, retail, and manufacturing sectors have left millions struggling, while CEOs continues to rake in bonuses. And that's how a capitalistic society works. It's all about profit, profit first, humanization. Humanity doesn't come in the first place. It has never been in the dictionary, what is called humanity. What's always in the first page of the dictionary is cash. More cash. More and more cash. More cash. People die, more cash. Something bad happens, more cash. Let's introduce a pandemic, more cash. That's how a capitalistic society works. Now, in connection to this, Edges forecasted a rise in the cost of living and an increase in taxation, though not necessarily in form most imagine. While Trump pushed tax breaks for corporations and the wealthy, the burden shifted sadly onto the working class through the state and local taxes, inflation, and service cuts. Today, housing, healthcare, food, education costs have skyrocketed, making basic survival a challenge for many. Meanwhile, billionaires have doubled their wealth, and their wealth inequality has reached historic levels. I just viewed this as not a failure of policy, but as the deliberate outcome of predatory economic system. The top 1% and the bottom 99%. Once you understand that concept, that the United States will always want you to be at the bottom 99%. That's why they're always trying to push the middle class Americans to go to the below to the bottom 99%, right? And the top 1% to remain the 0.5 top percent. So you can imagine how it's crazy. They'll push it even to 0.2 They'll push it even to 0.1. Just wait and see. So it's going crazy and crazy and crazier. There is erosion or there is erasure of middle class America. This is what they're trying to do. Also, there is so much interference with freedom of speech. There are so many broadcast news that have been shut down by Mr. Donald Trump for saying some things that are considered as hateful or are considered as a threat to the United States security. Now, that being said, freedom of speech, a hallmark of any democratic society, has also come under attack in ways I just warned about. The Trump administration's hostility towards journalists, whistleblowers, and protesters was emblematic of this trend. While the First Amendment remains legally intact, the political culture has grown increasingly intolerant of dissent. Edges argue that democracy dies not only through overt censorship, but also when the truth tellers are vilified, independent media is gutted, and public discourse is drowned in propaganda. The vilification of movements like Black Lives Matter and the labeling of journalists as enemies of the people are chilling indicators of these erosion. Also, I'm going to be addressing an aspect that Edges touched on: weaponization of religion and nationalism to build a cult of personality. First, he observed how Trump, despite lacking moral credibility, aligned himself with evangelical leaders and adopted a messianic image. This merging of political and religious fundamentalism creates an environment where facts no longer matter, only loyalty. Edges drawing from historical fascist movements emphasize that this irrational devotion enables the dismantling of democratic norms while cloaking tyranny in patriotic rhetoric. Today we see echoes of these in ongoing election denialism, and the normalization of the political violence. Also, Edges also examined the psychological toll of neoliberal collapse, suggesting that Trump's rise reflected a society gripped by despair and nihilism. People stripped of stability and purpose became susceptible to authoritarianism. The opioid crisis, suicide rates, and mass shooting are not isolated events, but symptoms of broader societal breakdown. In this vacuum, Trump offered a false sense of strength and direction, which Edges called political pornography, gratifying, superficial, and dangerous. The crisis of meaning, he argued, must be addressed with moral vision and demagoguery. Also, you get to understand institutional failure was another cornerstone of Edges' argument. He believed that Democratic Party, once a champion of labor and civil rights, had become a complicit in corporate rule, leaving a political vacuum. Trump exploited. Today, public trust in institutions, Congress, the media, the judiciary is near an all-time low. Edges asserts that without credible institutions advocating for public good, governance and policies serve as the donor class, not the citizenry. Trump didn't cause this decline, he simply capitalized on it. He capitalized on decline. Now, what's the conclusion of all this? Chris Edges' critique on Donald Trump was less about Trump as an individual and more about what he represented. The endgame of unchecked capitalism, political cowardice, and social atomization, the conditions Edges warned about: race conflict, economic ruin, authoritarian drift, have not only emerged but became normalized. His message was a call to moral resistance, to reject the distractions of culture war, confront systemic inequality, and build solidarity across class and race. If we ignore this, the problem is still going to be happening to the citizens of the United States. So I'm your host and presenter, Agent Stories, and I hope you find this video so really helpful. If you're watching us for the first time, I'll ask you to subscribe to the channel, join our membership, and really get so we can offer you. For those who are supporting me through my Cash App, I'm saying thank you so much. For those who are sending me super thanks, I'm saying thank you. I'm hoping to see you on my next video, but until then, peace, love, and harmony. Salute.